The Cambrian explosion sure is a misleading name. As far as I can tell, there was no explosion. I mean, there might have been, but it has nothing to do with Cambria, whoever that is. What do you have to do to get 53 million years named after you anyway? What kind of name is Cambria? What does Cambria even mean? Whales? And I don't mean the seafaring kind, I mean the land kind. I don't mean land whales, I mean the land of whales, as opposed to the sea of whales and many other creatures, not to be confused with whales. Also possibly known as Cambria, the namesake of a non-explosive explosion, otherwise known as a lie. Good morning after eve night, Cosmoronic number 17, I'm Fringy and I hope you're all doing well. Yeah, actually, Cambria is named after whales, by the way. Dude, Wikipedia is your best friend. Everybody gets mad at me for citing Wikipedia, but I'll never stop. I've learned so many wonderful things from just skimming through Wikipedia. Like, the vast majority of these cold opens are just, oh shit, I don't know what to talk about or make a meme out of. Oh, I know, Wikipedia. It's your best friend. It's a wealth of probably fairly reputable information, or as reputable as it needs to be for the needs that you probably have. Like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be writing a dissertation based on Wikipedia articles, but if you want to, like, speak on any topic, any, like, general topic at a low level, if you read Wikipedia, you're probably, like, doing better than a good chunk of people, honestly. I'm just saying, Wikipedia is a wonderful website, and I will not stand for any besmirching of that it's kind of funny to say resource, but it is a resource, in some sense. So I reckon we should open up with a little bit of housekeeping. Cosmoronic is going to be going fortnightly from here on out. The reason is very boring. There's only so much time available every week, and I want to use it efficiently. Cosmoronic simply takes longer to make than I'm willing to spend making it. Like, big creative projects are my main priority, and I want to make as much time for them as possible. Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Only so much time in a week, so you gotta try and prioritize. But I mean, obviously, I'm gonna keep doing it because Cosmoronic is fun. I enjoy it. I find it rewarding. I guess, by comparison to the other things that I work on, it would probably be, like, presentation, I think. It's a good way to sort of develop some thoughts that I have, because when you just sit on them in your head, I don't know how useful that is, but verbalizing them, nothing can ever go wrong by verbalizing pretty poorly conceived thoughts. To be clear as well, you'll still be getting regular streams, including on the normal Cosmoronic day, but the episodes themselves will be happening every 2 weeks. Hopefully that doesn't make anybody too sad. I would be surprised if somebody lost sleep at night over that. But anyway, on to topics, in the usual scattershot way, as seems to be the way that these episodes begin now. The finale of Stranger Things Season 4 was disappointing, and that seems to be a marginally unpopular opinion. Only a little bit, though, which I guess is, a good sign, I think. I think it means that issues that I perceived with that finale did not go unnoticed by general audiences. Now, I really enjoyed Volume 1 of this season. There were a lot of great scenes and moments in those first 7 episodes, and I liked a lot of the characters. Oh, well, I guess, to lay out the background, I watched the first season, and I liked it, but it didn't make that much of an impression on me. And then I didn't watch Season 2 and 3 because, I don't know, I started watching Season 2, Episode 1, and then I stopped and I just never came back to it. And then I heard that Season 2 and 3 weren't very good. But then, lo and behold, everybody's talking about Season 4 and how it's great. And at least, you know, up until, like, when the first volume had come out. And not only was it really great, but that it had rehabilitated the show overall. It had gone a long way to try and fix a lot of the problems that were created in Season 2 and 3. One could say, based on what I've heard, that it was very retconny, but it seems like nobody really minds because people didn't really like those other seasons. So my experience with the show was I watched the first season, and then I never really gave the show that much thought in the years since. And then I watched Season 4, based on the recommendations of several people. And apparently I haven't missed much, and I have a decent understanding of the story and everything I really need to know just by watching this season. And yeah, by the end of those first 7 episodes, I really liked it. I was downright excited for that finale. I went into it with a lot of expectations that I think were well informed, but to be more specific, you could go into that episode, in those last 2 episodes, and really speculate on a variety of different outcomes for the characters and the conflict with Vecna and, just how everything would turn out. And despite how disparate a lot of those predictions could be, they all felt really well informed. That to me seems indicative of quality writing, when you can reasonably predict a variety of different things and they all line up and they can all be really potent because everything's been set up so well. The opposite version of that is what often happens when you watch something that, sucks, and you start developing expectations not based on the writing itself, but rather based on the meta, or, what you would expect somebody who isn't very good at writing to do. For instance, God, can I just move on? Obi-Wan Kenobi, a lot of things were expected of that show, and panned out, but not based on, reasonable inferences from the writing. It was more so based on, yeah, of course you're gonna do that. Yeah, you need your mandatory action scenes. Yeah, you need these payoffs. You have no imagination, so of course you're gonna do this. That's a really lame way of seeing your predictions come true. Compared to, well, they've foreshadowed in this way. We've got these characters with these relationships going on. These characters are heading in this direction. How does it all tie into the central conflict? You start thinking about all of the potential, essentially, in the story. That's really fun. It's really fun when you get to have that experience while watching a show. And especially in sort of this era of streaming, where, most streaming services, all of the episodes come out, at the same time. You can leave that room for people to have conversations about what's going to happen next, where everybody gets to really participate in the discussion surrounding the show as it goes on. It seems like Netflix essentially started the trend of dumping all of... I don't want to say dumping, because it's not... I don't think it's like a negative thing. Started the trend of releasing all your episodes all at once. A lot of shows and streaming services are now moving back to weekly, or in some sense segmented releases, and that just seems to yield better results when it comes to discourse and engagement. I wouldn't be surprised if this continues and if it's going to happen with more Netflix shows, if it's going to actually end up being a lot more like, I guess, the Disney Plus way of doing it. Suppose the difference here, though, is that Stranger Things is leveraging the fact that it's a streaming show and that it doesn't need to be 43 episodes per episode. 43 episodes. 43 minutes per episode. These episodes were long. We have like 2.5 hour long episodes. I like that freedom that is afforded by streaming, where you don't have to be bound by the same restrictions that you typically have on like network television. This is a big old tangent. What I'm getting at is that I liked the first 7 episodes of this season, and I liked most of the characters. The standouts being Eddie, Dustin, Max, Steve, and Eleven. Though I wonder if sort of the characters I picked as my favorite is informed by how much I don't know about what happened with those characters in the intervening seasons. But I mean, there was a lot to like about these characters, and especially the dynamics. Though even watching Volume 1, it was difficult to pinpoint the point of the California, plotline. When you watch a show, and the Hopper plotline, really, when you watch a show that has essentially 4 main plot lines that are running that don't seem to have much to do with each other at all, you do expect them to eventually meet up and all become relevant to, the central mystery, the central drama. This is called foreshadowing, because the finale, I think, damages the whole season, for me anyway. Plot threads I thought were going to go somewhere ended up leading nowhere, and a lot of setups were left unresolved, and there were a lot of opportunities that I don't think were seized with that finale. I think if I were to say what my big problem with the finale is, it's that they weren't willing to commit to serious consequences. What they did, by way of consequences in this episode, comes across as the least that they could do. You know, the least that they could commit to by way of serious consequences for the heroes, so that you still get your sort of Pyrrhic Empire Strikes Back ending, but not really. Not as far as it could have gone. Kind of takes the wind out of the intimidation factor for Vecna, and it leaves me a little concerned for, you know, season 5 and what's gonna come of what they've set up for that season. I guess what's unfortunate is that several narrative opportunities weren't seized and can no longer be seized. Max's sort of fake out death stands out. As far as I'm concerned, they cheated, they double dipped, they got the emotional roller coaster which came with her death while not committing to her death and not having that character in the story anymore. You understand what I mean? It's like you've almost cheated, you know? Like you've managed to extract from the viewer or provide for the viewer the payoff of and the sadness of a character death while not committing to actually killing off that character. You know, like she'll probably be off on the periphery and the sidelines for now, but I mean she'll come back. She'll essentially get resurrected and be fine. It's like, so you essentially got to get both parts of I guess this narrative payoff. You get the death and the sadness that comes with it, and then you also get the character still being present in the story, when the whole point of a character death is that they're not in it anymore. You lose that character, you lose what they bring to the story. That's what makes it so sad. You know, when you look at the other significant character deaths, the only other one was Eddie, which I think we all knew was going to be the case. His story was leading him to a place where it seemed likely that he was going to die. And I don't want to downplay it, like, that character was great. Eddie was fantastic, and he got a really... one of the best moments in the whole season. There were a lot of great moments in this season. I mean, we're going to say what the best one is. It will definitely be Max episode 4, running up that hill. It's a pretty easy choice. It's a really fantastic sequence. I think a close second would have to be Eddie playing Metallica to distract the bats while they're in the Upside Down. It's a fucking awesome payoff. It's a really great moment and a fun way to inject music diegetically into the story in a way that's meaningful for the character. Now, of course, kind of have to not think about, might have been a good idea to bring a bunch of amps in with some generators or something, set up those amps or speakers all around the Upside Down and then turn them on and then run to the next one and turn it on so that you can keep the bats distracted without having to risk your life. But, you know, I guess you gotta make these choices, and that was a really cool moment, and he receives a really fitting send-off, a really emotional send-off. There should have been more scenes dedicated to him, though. We should have seen the team react to his death rather than just Dustin. It kind of stings that he died a hero and nobody in the town acknowledges it or recognizes it. And, I mean, as far as we know, I don't even know if he got, like, a proper funeral. Maybe his corpse is still sitting in the Upside Down. You know, just sitting there being munched on. I don't know, because we never saw the rest of the team react to it. And, I mean, they had time and they could have done it, but I mean, that two-day time jump was really misguided. I think we needed to see what was going on in that time, and it's so odd to watch a finale that is 2.5 hours long and to come away from it feeling like you wasted time. Not that you padded out time, but more so that there was time available to you that should have been dedicated to certain moments that wasn't leveraged. It's a really odd thing to have so much time in an episode and to still feel like more time was needed to fully capitalize on the threads that you had. It would have been nice if we got more than just Dustin talking to Eddie's uncle about who Eddie was and his sacrifice and what a great guy he was. I think he deserved more time than that, especially when, in this finale, we committed to so few consequences, really, for these characters. It's a really odd, if we're gonna call it a Pyrrhic victory, narratively, it's a really odd one because it ends with the reveal that, you know, and it's not even really a reveal because he said this is just the beginning, that Vecna's still alive and his plan is hatched and the Upside Down is leaking into the real world. But that comes right at the end after a good 20-30 minutes of, like, pretty happy material overall. Happy in terms of good resolutions for many characters, the belief that they had won, and of course the big one that even though Max had died, and it was a really it was really an emotionally riveting death, superbly acted. Like, the performances in this show are fantastic. That then gets undercut by 11 somehow finding a way to prevent that from happening. But like, you put that part to one side, then like everything else is like pretty chill. I think it was reasonable to think that season 4 would end with, like an Empire Strikes Back situation of they lost, and then the next season they'll have to rally together to save the day. And I think that would have been further reinforced with more serious consequences for the characters. And I think it would have been served better if Vecna hadn't been undercut, which I think he was. Vecna is a really cool villain, but I think the finale undercut his otherwise incredibly imposing status within the story. Like, his fight with 11, I don't even really understand what was going on there. He'd be winning, then she'd be winning, then he'd be winning, then she'd get a pep talk and then win. I don't really understand the nature of how they're battling here or why one person wins over the other. Kind of seems like the story, depending on what drama they want, will decide who's going to win and lose these confrontations, so that's not too fun. Kind of makes it hard to understand what's going on. And then there's more so the minor things, which I think come through clearly in the finale, but are persistent throughout the season because it was the case in episode 8 too. This show relies a lot on coincidences that it doesn't need. It really doesn't need them, you know? Like, it doesn't need to have characters show up at just the right moment, or for, you know, something to happen at just the right second for the sake of, like, maximum drama. It can just be, like, a minor tweak, and it would just fix everything, which, for as many problems as you can perceive in the season, mixed amongst the really great moments, you can't look at this season and say that it wasn't written by talented and competent writers. There's clearly talent here. They know how to create meaningful character payoffs. They know how to do a decent amount of good plotting between some of the more flimsy plotting. Like, there are aspects of the investigation throughout this season that I was downright like, yeah, that's really cool, actually. That's a really good inference. That's a good place to lead that line of thought. You earned getting to that place. There's a lot of that in the show. There's a lot of aspects of it that are just really impressive, that even with the flaws that appear in the finale, or flaws that may become more apparent if I rewatch the whole season, there's clearly great ideas here, many of which were executed very well. It has the problem that a good amount of stuff has, which is that the connective tissue, the parts of the story in between the big potent moments, are a little bit flimsy. And it's that's kind of lame, because it's just minor tweaks, you know, like another redraft, or just like these very small changes can just elevate it so much. Given that the next season is the final season, I think season 4 was the time to go full Empire Strikes Back and deliver a serious blow to the heroes. In a sense, the heroes didn't win, but yeah, this is the least consequential way for them to have lost. And you talk about plot lines that don't seem to go anywhere. I don't really know what Hopper's story had to do with anything. I liked Hopper's story, and I like Hopper, and I like what was going on with him, but I don't see the connection really to the main story at all. It's kind of like you've got the main story going on, and then Hopper's adventures in Russia. I don't say that super disparagingly, because I like the character stuff that they did for Hopper. I really liked his little monologue. I find that story compelling, and I liked a lot of the characters who were involved in that story. Joyce, Yuri, Murray. Murray grew on me. At first I was kind of 50-50, but the more it went on, the more I started to like him. Like, I like that plotline. I just don't see how directly it connects to the main one. And as for, like, Will, Mike, and Jonathan and, like, their story, that one to me felt like that was totally rudderless. It was as though their story had the least amount of thought put into it. It received the least amount of really potent character moments. There were a couple that were really well acted, and then there was the one take that was super impressive, technically. But otherwise, their story kind of trailed behind 11's story, which was much more deeply connected to the central conflict. So in that sense, their story is It's not like quite tangential, but it's just not that deeply tied into the central conflict. And so yeah, you're left with the impression that some of these plot lines didn't really go anywhere compared to the plot line that is going to be the main focus and the one that everybody cares the most about, which is the Hawkins plot line with the team working together to figure out who Vecna is, how to beat him. That is the best plot line in the series. It has the most fun character interactions. It has a lot of the best character moments. But the other ones, it's kind of like, I don't know. And I wonder, on a rewatch, how I'd feel about them, especially. I guess I kind of sound like a downer here, but I really was on the show's side. And I kind of still am. I really like season 4. There were too many great moments in that season for my issues with the finale to like really overshadow what I would pull from them. Even if those moments themselves are undermined, there's enough thematic juice there that I think I'm always going to like this season. I guess it's just that, this season did a lot of work to rehabilitate the story, and I think that they tripped over at the finish line, and I'm just not as optimistic about season 5 as I was even just a few days ago. But I'll still be watching it. It's a fun show. It's got a fun premise. It's got a banger soundtrack. And the sense while watching this season that there was a lot of planning that went into it, that they thought through a story that they wanted to tell, rich with ideas that they had, and then, executed on those ideas. There's enough value here that I will continue to watch the show and, watch the final season. I'm just not as optimistic for it as I was a few days ago. I've been playing Cuphead, the delicious last course, and I really like it. Cuphead rightfully receives praise for its amazing art and animations, but replaying that game just reminds me that it deserves comparable praise for its core gameplay loop. Each boss presents the player with a complex web of unique obstacles that they have to keep track of to succeed, and that's like a really simple idea, but it's incredibly versatile. You can just keep building bosses and levels atop this idea. I'm sure I talked about it in the Cuphead review I did back in the day, which actually was back in the day because Cuphead is nearly 5 years old, and you can see that work. You can see that work in this DLC. Amazing animations, great art, and I mean, even just beyond the technical side, like really imaginative art too. And then you're reminded of how smooth the animations are because they're at 60 frames per second, hand-drawn. Like, the amount of work that went into that game just seeps from it. It's impossible not to recognize the amount of work and talent that went into that game. And I mean, it's a great aesthetic atop a core that I think has a lot worth praising and a lot to dig into that maybe it is talked about a lot. I just don't see it talked about a lot. I think the memes regarding the game's difficulty can sometimes distract people from thinking about just how well designed the game is. Playing these bosses and progressing, moving on to the next phase, and then accounting for their new attacks. What you see in a lot of these bosses is a space that is filled with obstacles that have different attributes that, when taken individually, are not that hard to account for, but when all thrown at you all at once, makes for a really complex maze that you need to try and navigate. You've got certain enemies that will move from left to right, certain enemies that will go up to down. You have like static obstacles you need to account for. You'll have objects that are shot at you, places that you can't stay for too long because the ground is littered with enemies or the ground may fall out from beneath your feet. You'll have objects that bounce around the play space, like bounce up and down and around the place. Obstacles that will spin in like a circle as they move across the screen. And so what you have is a bunch of obstacles that have different movement speeds, different movements overall, straight or clockwise, counterclockwise, all of these things in this space playing out all at once. And you need to account for these while continuing to attack a boss who himself has a variety of moves that he'll use against you. The difficulty that comes with trying to design levels and bosses this way is the perceived sense of fairness in these encounters is really important to maintain. If it reaches a point where it feels like the game is downright unfair to you, you're just going to get pissed off and not play anymore. But when you feel that the game is fair, it's a fair challenge and you just keep contending with it because you know that with time and with practice, you'll eventually surmount it. But conveying fairness is, what does it mean to leave players with the impression that what they are playing is fair? I think a lot of that comes down to telegraphing. How clearly, before you are subjected to an attack, can you tell that that attack is coming? You need to give the player enough time to react to a potential threat that they can account for it and move out of the way. Ideally, you'd want to create a game, and it's clear in the point system, that you are entirely capable of, and in some sense expected to be able to complete every battle without being hit. And that shouldn't be simply a matter of luck. That should be a matter of skill, that you can feasibly beat any boss without taking damage. If you can't respond to potential threats, that's going to be nearly hard, nearly impossible rather, or perhaps downright impossible depending on just how difficult the game is. And so a lot of what makes Cuphead's essentially prism of danger work so well is very clear telegraphing, rhythms and patterns that you can begin to observe and utilize. And of course, the different moves that are available to you, the different, weapons that weapons, right? Weapons of clicking your fingers and then like a ray points out or like a blaster comes out of your finger and blows people up. But I mean, you have a variety of different attacks at your disposal, different charms that you can use. You can think about which charms will best serve your playstyle. And of course, the new playable character adds new variables as well to account for. It's a very strong core. And so what they've been able to do is create DLC that you can just throw more bosses at the player, just give them some different attributes, but you're really using a lot of the same core for all of these bosses, but you can just keep doing that. You can keep building more content on top of the base because it's such a good base. I find Cuphead such an immensely impressive project. The amount of hard work that went into creating that game, visually and in terms of its design, it is such a great idea. It's such a great idea for a game, and I'm so glad that they created DLC for it. I would happily buy Cuphead 2 if we're doing the same thing again, because I don't know what there is that you would need to change. The core is strong, it's only a matter of adding things on, and I think that's reflected in what is here with the DLC. It's like adding on new bosses to fight, new levels, new attacks, new playable character. You don't need to radically change what Cuphead is, because what it is very strong. All you need to do is add stuff on. I just think that the meme of how difficult this game is, which it's a funny meme, that tutorial thing is never not going to be funny, and the discourse still rages on about difficulty. Am I going to allow myself to go on a tangent about difficulty? I think I will. A lot of the value of Cuphead, for me, comes from the difficulty of that game. The catharsis that you get from surmounting a difficult boss, that's an experience that only games can provide. Difficulty and challenge is a part of the experience that I sometimes think people dismiss as simply in the way of you progressing. Like, challenge isn't the experience. The difficulty or the obstacle isn't the experience. It's the thing that stands between you and progressing the story or simply getting to the end of the game. Pulling value from that challenge is not really, it could be whatever it needs to be, depending on how I'm feeling, that day or what my interests are. And that's fine. A lot of games offer the variance and difficulty depending on what kind of experience you want. But I find it really, really annoying that you can have a game that wants to create that kind of experience of, this is hard, you need to be of this level of skill to beat it. We have designed it and balanced this encounter for this specific difficulty level. And if you can't complete it, that's totally fine. It's just not the game for you. That is an unacceptable answer, and that all games need to be implementing difficulty settings that will undeniably, depending on what kind of experience the developers are wanting to create, undercut the challenge and the catharsis that comes with surmounting the challenge. And if you want to get a little more artsy, the value that you can extract from the meta surrounding a game. The knowledge that if you talk to somebody who beats a certain game that has no difficulty settings, they beat it and you beat it, you have a shared experience. You both surmounted the same obstacle, as opposed to not even necessarily a bad thing, the less valued nature of the challenge in games where the combat or the difficulty or the surmounting of bosses or the boss encounters themselves just aren't that important, you know? I think there's something valuable there that I think, depending on the priorities of the developer, are worth preserving, are worth pursuing and preserving as an experience. It is something that is very unique to video games, and when we want to talk about the breadth of artistic expression that you can get from video games, challenge, difficulty, surmounting obstacles is, depending on the choice of the developer, a part of the experience. And not just a part of the experience, not just the thing that you have to endure to get to the next cutscene, but a valued part of the experience. I don't like the attitude that difficulty is... It's whatever. It's not a big deal. You can change it. It's not like you designed the game at this difficulty level, or if you want to be especially presumptuous and frankly a little bit stupid, oh, you failed by creating a game that you can't do difficulty settings for. That is a failure on you as a designer, not a mismatch between your priorities and my priorities. No, you're just bad at what you do. I just think that the challenge of a video game is... or can be a really valued part of the experience. And in the case of Cuphead, it's there's no getting around it. That's a huge part of the value of that experience. I just think difficulty is a valued part of the experience, and then in the case of Cuphead, it's an important part of what I like about it. However, even with all that said, and acknowledging the memes and everything, I just want to reiterate that yeah, I think this game is really well designed, and the same so far seems to hold true of the DLC. These bosses have been great, I've been having a ton of fun, and I look forward to continuing with the DLC in the coming days. EA's official Twitter account tweeted something very stupid. There are 10, but they only like playing single-player games. It didn't take long for the very snarky replies to amass, and EA's pitiful quote tweet did little to stem the shitstorm. The reply was, or the quote tweet, "Roast well deserved. We'll take this L because playing single-player games actually makes them 11. A hilariously futile attempt to scurry away from the relentless clowning, and indeed the clowning was relentless. Funnily enough, I actually, I saw that tweet, like 5 minutes after it went up. I saw it, and I was baffled. I was genuinely baffled. I couldn't believe that they had said that, and that they expected to not piss people off by saying that. I find the quote tweet really, really funny because there's no running away, right? You have to like commit to it instead of doing this thing because, you know, what does it mean to say they're an X but Y if Y is not a negative attribute? You know what I mean? They're great, but fantastic. They're smart, but a good swimmer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense. You can't just come back and go like, aha, yeah, see, we done bamboozled you. What we're actually saying is that they're really great for only playing single player games. And what is your perspective then on playing multiplayer games? You can't run away. You can't scurry into the little corner, EA. You can't show your belly and say, I'm sorry. No, I'm really on your side. It doesn't work. It can't work. You screwed up. Some poor intern who runs EA's Twitter account. Or maybe I don't even understand how the PR situation works. Maybe that went through multiple people. You know, multiple people saw that tweet and thought, yes, this will go over very well. This was one of a few instances I can think of where a PR bungle saw individuals within the industry, you know, developers, press, etc., openly and scornfully deriding the company and the sentiment behind it. Which, you know, fair enough, is a really bad tweet, coaxed in a narrow-minded attitude about video games. It's hilarious to me that somebody at EA thought their company, like Electronic Arts, could get away with a tweet like this. Like I said, when I saw it, for a moment, I was legitimately baffled that EA could be so stupid to tweet this. But then I remember that EA makes a quarter of its revenue from FIFA Ultimate Team, and it all started lining up to me. I'm reminded once again that Twitter discourse is not necessarily reflective of reality, and by that I mean that the sentiment that is prevalent in these types of discussions on social media does not necessarily reflect the broad sentiment of the market. I wouldn't be surprised, in fact, if some of the people who shit on EA for this tweet had played or were going to play Call of Duty Warzone, League, CSGO, or Valorant that very day. You know, derisive quote tweets don't really matter in the face of an industry where most of the money is to be made in multiplayer games. And so, where does that leave us in thinking about the truth behind EA's really stupid tweets? Not the truth of, like, your merits as a gamer based on what types of games you play, or some sort of weird attitude that, like, multiplayer games are strictly, fundamentally, and necessarily better than single-player games. Like, none of that. But more so, like, why would a company ever tweet something like that, if not because of their perception, informed by the money that they make, about the priorities of the industry? Like, it's really, it really sucks when you see, because I'm pretty sure one of the people who replied to that tweet was a developer who worked at Visceral Games, who essentially said, like, yeah, we were making a single player game and then you shut our studio down. And of course, you know, developers of single player games like Cory Barlog talking about it, it really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, rightfully so. I guess I just wonder what is achieved by this kind of response to a tweet like this, when on social media you get one reaction, but the money that you make indicates that you were appealing to a larger audience by saying that, you know? Should it have surprised anybody that EA would tweet something like this? Not because the perspective is wrong, which of course the perspective is incredibly narrow-minded and stupid, but more so like, does it surprise you that this is the perspective of Electronic Arts? You know, we know what Electronic Arts' priorities are. They want to make live service games. They're not very interested in single-player games. They have a couple of them. Star Wars Jedi series, which I'm pretty sure Vince Zampella was one of the people who replied negatively to that tweet as well. So like, they get shit from within their own company, from like their own subsidiaries. What a bungle. What a massive PR bungle. But, you know, getting back to the point, you know, EA, what kind of games do they make? Single player wise, they got Jedi Fallen Order and the sequel that's coming out. They're making a remake to Dead Space. Otherwise, well, they got Battlefield 2042, which is a catastrophe. They got FIFA, which makes a lot of money. They got Madden, which makes a lot of money. I guess they got Need for Speed, which is probably, I don't know if, there's nothing happening for Need for Speed right now, I think. But I wouldn't be surprised if there'll be a new one that leans super into live service. Let's step back from the sort of sentiment and perspective that is expressed in these discussions online by people who are engaged in the industry and like engaged in conversations about video games and stuff, compared to what the broader market's interests are. I think that over the last 5 or so years, I think we can trace the beginning of this to the Xbox One. So we're going back nearly a decade for this discussion. The Xbox One had a really bad reputation, and much of it stemmed from the Xbox One being a platform for essentially live service, before live service as a name had really originated, because there's always been a desire to move towards, you know, essentially a live service model or something akin to that. You don't want just one point of sale. You want repeatable, consistent points of sale. You want to be able to make money reliably, persistently, rather than investing millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars into a product for which you will make the majority of your money in the course of like a month. And that's what they've always wanted to move towards. The Xbox One was a step too far at the time. If they had done this now, the Xbox One probably would have succeeded, or it would have gotten pushback for sure, but it would have been much more accepted in this climate. The Xbox One was a bridge too far. Online only, can't like no-use games, like can't trade your games with people, they get locked to your accounts. And of course, a huge investment in like the cloud as a vague concept, multiplayer games, continually expanding products and services. And everybody fucking hated it. Rightly so. Meanwhile, the sort of The line for PlayStation is, no, we're not doing that. And then, over the course of the generation, it very much evolved into PlayStation is where you go for single-player games, which is, you know, that's actually quite broad if you just think about it that way. You go here for single-player games, like, that's a good amount of variety. But based on the sort of where the accolades within the media, or maybe reflected in discussions about video games online, went, it kind of led to a place where you almost have this dichotomy. Single-player, narrative-driven, third-person action-adventure games with stealth elements. That was, like, heralded as, like, the peak of like, the creativity of the industry and the merits of the industry, like, pure, distilled, untainted quality. Meanwhile, like, multiplayer is the pits. Or so you would think based on the sentiment that you often see in online circles. But I mean, if you just look at the sales figures, online multiplayer games is a much bigger market. What it means in terms of the amount of people who buy these games is one thing, but like how many people buy them, that is one thing. The other part is how much money do you make from it. And the reality is that multiplayer games have much more potential to make more money than a game that you buy once, and that's the end of it. You go to the store, you buy like your Last of Us 2, let's say. That's $60 minus the cuts that go to all of the different, you know, entities that are involved in that, especially when you talk about a physical sale. Meanwhile, how much money does Call of Duty Warzone make? It's like, well, is the Battle Pass like, what, $15 every 3 months? Plus any extra stuff that you buy? Loot box. I don't know if Warzone has loot boxes, but it definitely has cosmetics, right? Like, there's more things that you can buy into these ecosystems. The same applies for a lot of our multiplayer games. And there's a hell of a lot less of the, you know, cuts that you have to account for because these games it's all digital. It's like 100% profit. And the same applies for a digital sale. You make a hell of a lot more money off of a digital sale than you do with a physical sale. So there's much more of a push for digital. You just have a larger profit margin on every point of sale. And so where does that lead to? What it means is that the amount of people who buy or play your game matters, but what matters a lot more is how much money each individual who participates is spending on your game. And the ceiling for that on a single player game that doesn't have any microtransactions or DLC or anything is the sale price at launch. You know, full retail price. On a multiplayer game, depending on your model and depending on how predatory it is potentially infinite. And so people will look at companies like Ubisoft and saying like they want to get more into live service games and laugh. And then the next company wants to also get into live service games and then laugh. And all that's happening is that you move towards live service games and scoff at the notion, sort of pretending like these companies must be run by insane people for trying to do so, because everybody hates live service games, right? Except look at how much money they make. Nobody likes EA, but that company makes a lot of money, despite it, and most of it comes from live service games. You know, Battlefield 2042 may be a well-publicized failure, but FIFA isn't. FIFA makes them like a quarter of their money every year. Like a quarter of their money. I remember I talked about it in a Pitiful Polemics episode. FIFA Ultimate Team made more money in the course of a year than EA made on every game that they had sold, point of sale, like directly, like purchasing a game. They made more money on FIFA Ultimate Team. The model is too lucrative, and no number of failures can dissuade publishers from creating live service games when all you need is one hit. You know, Battlefield 2042, yeah, it failed. It didn't work out. It didn't make them as much money as they wanted. The game is, it's a catastrophe. I don't even want to downplay. Like, that game was a disaster, and I'm sure they're not happy with it. They're gonna try again, though. They'll try and rehabilitate 2042, and if they haven't decided to rehabilitate 2042, they'll just try again. Of course they're going to try again. Any utility that they can get out of a small appeasement of the audience, of like going back to more of what they say that they want, it won't matter if, it's just not worth it when pursuing fully the live service model. If that works, that's billions of dollars. You're good. You're golden for years. There is a high investment in these types of games, but the return of succeeding is so high that they're always going to keep trying to make live service games. And just shitting on them is not going to fix the problem. The model is too lucrative to stop. It's so lucrative that even Sony, who are considered basically like the paragons of preserving the AAA, single-player, narrative-driven, cinematic, third-person action-adventure game, even Sony is now looking looking is downplaying it. Like, Sony is now investing heavily into live service games. They bought Bungie to help them make live service games. They want to have, I believe, like, at least 2 or 3 live service games by 2025. It's a big deal for them now because there's too much money to make. And at the end of the day, in the economy that we live in, these companies have an incentive to, and pretty much a responsibility to, maximize their earnings. And in this industry, in the video game industry, the place where you get your maximized earnings as like a massive multinational corporation is in live service multiplayer games. No matter how much we shit on them for saying stuff that essentially informs that perspective on Twitter, like EA did. The industry is changing, and it's important that we understand how and why so that we can have one hand on the wheel rather than naively pretending that everybody hates EA and their live service games while they make billions of dollars every year. Like, what I want from this discussion is not essentially, it's over them. Like, live service is here to stay, whatever, there's no point, we're screwed. These models that are predatory, games that are sapped of their artistic merit, this is just the way it's going, so just accept it. I don't want to have that attitude. I want to have a more realistic attitude, though. What I want people to recognize is that live service games are going to be here to stay. They're going to continue to invest in them. And so what we need to do collectively as consumer base, as players, especially since I love single player games and I want more single player games and I want to retain the variety of experiences that exist beyond the live service realm. I want that. And I also want good multiplayer games that I can enjoy too. What that demands to guide the industry in that place is not to pretend that the industry is not heading in that direction, regardless of the amount of bad press that they seemingly get for doing so. You want to have one hand on the wheel, you want to guide the business model of these live service games to be less predatory, more fair, because of course as a consumer you should be advocating hardcore for your position. That's what it means to be a responsible and good consumer. It's to advocate as much as possible for your interests, because the companies are going to do that for themselves. And if you do it for yourself, then you end up in an equilibrium where nobody's really happy, but nobody's particularly upset either, which is the best that you can expect, really. And in order to do that, I think we need to have a solid recognition of the state of the industry. That was a really stupid tweet. The sentiment behind it, though, is reflective of a reality that does exist, that I'm not a fan of, and that I don't think can be effectively countered without recognizing the truth behind the sentiment. The truth not being that multiplayer games are better than single player games, but rather that multiplayer games make a lot of money. A lot more money than single player games. And these companies are going to follow the money. We need to be more precise in our understanding of the nature of this industry, and more precise in advocating for what we want out of single player games and their continued existence, and live service multiplayer games, which will continue to exist, regardless of how much flack they get on the internet. Regardless of whether, I guess, we agree or disagree on that, I'm sure we could all agree that was a really stupid and funny tweet. What an unbelievable, yet simultaneously very believable goof. That does it for me this week. Thank you very much for hanging out. This was Cosmoronic 17. I'm Fringy, and I'll catch you all next time.